Good morning. If we should get the train going. My name is Jacob Kirkegaard, and on behalf of Adam Posen, the president of the Peterson Institute, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome the Irish Finance Minister, Paschal Donohoe, to the Peterson Institute today. We have welcomed several of your predecessors as well, and we're delighted to have you here. Minister Donohoe has, and I can say that because we are roughly the same age, has an extensive ministerial career despite his young years, I would say. He has been the Minister of Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform in Ireland since June 2017. He was prior to that the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. He has also been Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sports. Now, as a Dane, I shall refrain from talking about World Cup qualifiers in that regard, except I will mention that thank God you have rugby. And he has also been a Minister for European Affairs. He has been a member of both houses of the Irish Parliament, as well as worked for Procter & Gamble. And he is, and this is something we appreciate greatly here at the Peterson Institute, a graduate from Trinity College in economics and politics. So it's hard to find better credentials to have this podium here, and we're delighted the minister will share some words for us. And I would also say it would be difficult to find, although I guess you could say that about any period in time, but there is certainly a lot to talk about. So, Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jacob, for the introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be back here in Washington and a real privilege to be joining you here this morning at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Institutes and think tanks such as this play a really important role as fora of analysis, of discussion, and of debate on the themes that shape the global economy. And as a policy maker, I recognise the vital contribution that independent analysis and commentary provides. Your capacity to gather such a broad range of expertise over the years is why this institute has been able to maintain for itself such an important voice in American and in global debates. And this indeed is one of the reasons why you have been voted the best economic think tank in North America for the past 3 years. So congratulations on that accolade. Before we begin, I want to pay tribute to the memory of the late President George H.W. Bush and the very important contribution he made to ending the Cold War and dealing with the difficulties of division in Europe. Because ending this division and dealing with those difficulties made possible the Europe that we have today. When the Berlin Wall fell, President Bush imagined a new world order taking its place. And I'm quoting him, a world where the rule of law supplants the role of the jungle, a world in which nations recognize their shared responsibility for freedom and justice, and a world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. This vision of a world order, based on the rule of law and backed by strong global institutions, has been a defining characteristic of how we in Ireland, a small country, but one that is outward-looking and open to the world, believe that the international order should be arranged. And central to our vision is a strong transatlantic relationship in which Europe and the United States work together to uphold shared values and principles and to promote the prosperity and well-being of both our peoples. So this morning, I want to speak of that relationship, of its past, of its present, and then I want to look to the future, to the role Ireland might play post-Brexit in bridging the Atlantic. So in the weeks leading up to this visit, I've really enjoyed reading Capitalism in America by Alan Greenspan and Adrian Wooldridge. It charts the history of your economy. The first chapter, A Commercial Republic, describes the catalysts of economic transformation between 1776 and 1860, and it identifies the laying of the first transatlantic cable on the 28th of July, 1866, as a key moment, creating integrated transatlantic financial markets. The book, however, neglects to mention that the departure of the vessel that began this project was from Valentia Island off the west coast of Ireland. So, from the very first transatlantic cables to the passenger liners of the earlier 20th century, to the busy air routes above our skies today, the Atlantic Ocean has been a highway between Ireland and the United States, carrying people, goods, hope, and ideas. Ours is a shared history of connections, of family ties built up over generations, of political ties built on values and beliefs held in common, and of countless business, cultural, academic, and indeed sporting ties. These bonds of friendship and cooperation that cross the Atlantic have helped shape the Ireland in which I grew up in and the Ireland of today. The United States made a central contribution to the search for peace in Northern Ireland through the leadership, support, and encouragement shown by countless US presidents and politicians, including, of course, Senator George Mitchell and many others. We remain thankful for the achievement of the Good Friday Agreement. In the 20 years since it was signed, it has provided the basis for peace, for stability, for reconciliation, and for cooperation on the island of Ireland. It also created a new opening in relations between Ireland and the United Kingdom, and I'll say a few words about that in a moment. But for now, I want to talk about the contribution the United States has made to the Irish economy. I was 9 years old when President Ronald Reagan visited Ireland in 1984. In an address to our Parliament, the President celebrated the fact that 300 American firms had invested there, employing some 40,000 people. 3 decades later, the number of US companies that Ireland hosts has now more than doubled, while the employment they create has increased fourfold, a reflection of the substance that is now underlying the investment. So why have these firms built such a strong presence in Ireland? There is indeed no single reason, but there are many. A common law, a common language, and a connected culture reflected in the 33 million Americans who claim Irish heritage. A pro-business environment underpinned by a tax code which is not only competitive in rate, but more importantly, is stable, simple, and transparent in function. A talented labour force with Europe's youngest population and one of its best educators. And then linked to this, most critically, I believe, is openness. Not just to investment, but to people. When we joined the European Union in 1973, less than 5% of Ireland's population was born overseas. Today, that number now stands at 17%. Our workforce is the third most international in Europe. We've come to recognize, I think, that our nation's greatest strength is the strength of our openness and, I hope, the strength of our welcome. Our Céid Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes. It's more than just a greeting. It is our way of engaging with other cultures and with the outside world. So that while we are an island people, we are the very opposite of an insular people. And that far from being on the periphery of Europe, we are at and aim to be at the centre of a transatlantic economy. So combined with access to the world's largest single market of 500 million consumers, it's this attribute above any other that has made Ireland a natural home for American investment. However, at the same time, Ireland is now investing in the US, because in the 21st century, transatlantic trade and investment is not a one-way flow. It's a two-way street. According to the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, Ireland's investment in the US totaled $147.8 billion last year, which is a stake in the US economy larger than countries that are many times our size. More than 500 Irish companies now have facilities and a presence here. What did they do? Well, they build American homes, from Cement Roadstone, Oldcastle, which is the continent's largest asphalt producer, to Kingspan, a market leader in advanced insulation. Ireland firms and Irish firms are now at the cutting edge of US construction. They save American lives. Aerogen's revolutionary aerosol delivery system, developed in Galway, has now improved health outcomes for more than 2.5 million Americans. ICON's award-winning research and development services have led to the approval of 18 of the world's 20 best-selling drugs. Our companies even sustain Americans, whether it's in the form of Kirkegaard, America's third largest butter brand, or McCann's, one of your favorite imported cereals, or the advanced nutrition products of companies like Kerry and Glanbia and others. And of course, because of all of this, Irish companies employ American workers. Over 100,000, to be exact, across all 50 states of the Union. The success of our companies abroad is, of course, rooted in the health of our economy at home. From a point of crisis, our country has made progress over the past few years. Our national finances are rebalancing. Our competitiveness has been restored. We are now approaching nearly full employment. Next year, we look forward to growth of approximately 4.5%, and our unemployment rate is down to 5.5%. We are, however, committed to continuing this work, committed to maintaining this progress, because the opportunities, but also the risks and the challenges that we face are there and are growing. And as we do all of this, we have to continue to find ways to support those who are vulnerable in our society. But we recognize the challenges that will impact on our ability to pursue further growth and to provide this kind of support and to enable us to realize these kind of opportunities. And one of these, of course, is Brexit. We are now at a historic moment in this development. Ireland and the UK joined the EU together 45 years ago. They're leaving, we're not. In the decades since then, we have grown closer by working together as partners in the European Union. The United Kingdom is our closest neighbour and is our friend. We are bound together by geography, by shared history, by culture, by kinship, and by trade. And I deeply regret that our British friends have chosen to embark on a different path, even if, of course, I respect their decision to do so. The British Parliament has been considering the terms of the withdrawal agreement and the accompanying political declaration on the shape of the future relationship that the UK will have with the EU after it is left. There is much at stake. For the United Kingdom, for Ireland, the EU member state that will be the most directly affected, for all the other members of the European Union, and indeed for the United States, a close and valued partner for all of us. And it is a very weighty and solemn decision, and one that I know our British friends and partners are considering very, very carefully. Crucially for Ireland, the withdrawal agreement guarantees, through the backstop arrangements in the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, that there will be no hard border on the island of Ireland in any circumstances. From the very beginning, protecting the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement has been a priority for the Irish government. We also set out to protect the common travel area between Ireland and Britain, to minimise the impact on our trade and our jobs and our economy, and to reaffirm our place at the heart of a strong and prosperous European Union. On each of those priorities, we have made satisfactory progress. And equally importantly, the withdrawal agreement provides a secure transition period during which much will remain unchanged, providing certainty to citizens and to businesses. And looking forward, we want to see the closest possible relationship between the UK and the EU. The ambition to achieve a deep and comprehensive partnership between the EU and the UK set out in the political declaration is very welcome, and we will work to make this happen. This is a carefully balanced agreement, and as with any negotiation of this scale, there have been compromises on both sides. However, let me be clear. There is no scope to reopen the withdrawal agreement. We're not under any illusions about the challenges that Brexit will bring for our economy, our business, our citizens, and for the way we engage with our British neighbours once they have left the European Union. And we are working hard to prepare and to be ready for the many scenarios. Brexit has now been embedded in the Irish government's economic decision-making and in the management of our economy. We have taken many important steps to prepare, However, we have further steps that we will now be taking in light of where the Brexit process stands now. In our budget for 2019, we continue to take care with decisions in relation to our economy. We're working to build up our budgetary capacity for the future by establishing a rainy day fund for next year. We're aiming to have national finances which will be fully balanced for next year. And over the next decade, we are now planning to invest €116 billion, more than a third of our gross domestic product, in long-term critical infrastructure, while working hard to manage current expenditure carefully. So while Brexit will pose undoubted challenges, there will be opportunities as well, and we will work to maximise those where possible. We'll be the only country in the European Union that is an English-speaking common law jurisdiction. We have, as I referenced earlier, a young, well-educated population, and the government continues to build a business-friendly environment for businesses large and small, foreign and domestic. And we will remain open to business, to talent from the United States and elsewhere. But we do all of this acknowledging that the world economy is increasingly interconnected and interdependent. Globalization and the digitalization of the economy continues apace. This poses many challenges. But these challenges are especially apparent in the field of international taxation. In a world of clickbait and sound bites, it's difficult to explain how some companies seem to be able to avoid paying their fair share of tax. Policymakers are now facing up to this challenge. And in this regard, I welcome the recent reforms to the US tax code. We are now seeing growing evidence of US companies repatriating historical profits to be taxed in the US. And I believe that these changes, combined with the widespread implementation of the BEPS recommendations, will have a very major impact. And we in Ireland have been playing our part. Our corporate tax roadmap, which I published in September, outlines what we have done and what we will do and by when to respond to this challenge. Further to legislating for a new exit tax, new controlled foreign company rules, and the BEPS multilateral instrument this year, our tax administration has worked bilaterally with, for example, its counterparts in Malta to bring about an end to the so-called single malt scheme. This agreement will mean companies will no longer be able to use a bilateral treaty to avoid tax. You may also be aware that Ireland has principled objections to the current proposed digital services tax. There is no agreement on this proposal at the moment, and negotiations are set to continue into next year. I firmly believe that a globally agreed, sustainable solution to the challenges digitalization presents is best achieved through the OECD. And we are working very closely with our partners in the OECD, including the US government, on this challenge. We share significant common ground. For instance, we both agree it's best to seek consensus on a way forward rather than countries taking unilateral action, and we all have faith that the OECD can deliver a solution. We are like-minded in the belief that the solutions to these challenges are within the corporate income tax system rather than taxing turnover. This principle encourages investment and growth, which ultimately can benefit the wider society. So it's in everyone's interest that the ongoing work results in an international tax framework that's sustainable into the long run to provide certainty to businesses and to governments in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, our membership of the European Union has been central to our success as a small, open, trading and competitive economy. It has enhanced, not diminished, our sovereignty. Only last Monday night, I sat with 26 other European ministers for finance, negotiating a way forward for deeper and more secure monetary union. This is an expression of sovereignty, not an erosion of it. Membership of the single market and customs union is a core element of our economic strategy. It has created access to allow our economy to prosper. It has given us full access to EU trade agreements with other major markets. And I want to see the discussions that are progressing towards a trade agreement between the United States and the European Union reach a mutually beneficial outcome because both economies stand to benefit. I believe that an open, rules-based global trading system has contributed to raising living standards on both sides of the Atlantic and throughout the world, and that a renewed case needs to be made for this argument. The European Union, for us, is a home that we have helped to build. And while there are many, many challenges, the Irish government is confident that we can work together as 27 countries to deal with these challenges. We are committed to remaining at the centre of this. We're committed to deepening our engagement with the rest of the world. And this is why, under a programme called Global Ireland, we're now leading an ambitious extension of our international footprint, including here in America. This includes strengthening our embassy in Washington and a new consulate in Los Angeles. It includes campaigning for a seat on the UN Security Council in 2021. And we are taking these steps to position our country for the future in our increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. A strong Ireland-US friendship within a wider partnership between the EU and the United States is part of our national vision. In a celebrated novel, Transatlantic, the Irish writer Colin McCann describes the multitude of connections and intersections, great and small, that crisscross the ocean between us, and how true that also is of the relationship between Ireland and America. Hewn from the hopes, aspirations, and contributions of countless women and men who have crossed our shared Atlantic to build homes, to build lives on each other's side of it. This rich multiplicity of connection sustains the transatlantic ties on which our shared prosperity rests. So Ireland will play its part to strengthen, to grow these bonds so that the Atlantic continues to be a rich and vibrant highway of people, of goods, of hopes and ideas, binding us all together. Thank you.
All right, this certainly looks to be on right now. Well, Mr. Minister, that was a tour de force of a host of important issues and current events, situation around the world. So let me kick up the conversational part of this event with a couple of questions before we open it up to the audience. You mentioned the crucial issue of tax, corporate tax to be specific, and obviously since you're the Minister of Finance at the time when Ireland is receiving its Apple windfall, you have a very personal angle on this. But I guess my core question is one of the things that came about in the recent U.S. corporate tax reform. You mentioned the work to increase repatriation, etc. But the other thing that was implemented was what I guess we could call a de facto minimum tax on U.S. multinationals, including those who have intellectual property rights registered around the world. And so basically a shift towards, if you like, a corporate minimum tax. And you mentioned the need for the multinational corporations, particularly in the digital age, to pay their fair share of tax. So I guess my basic question is, what is the level of a fair share of tax?
Well, I think it's difficult to define what that is on an average level, because within the digital world and within the global economy, we have so many different kinds of companies of different scale and involved in different forms of economic activity. So from my point of view, though, I think there would be two principles that would be at the heart of a fair tax contribution that individual companies can make. The first one is that it is related to where economic value is actually created. And so that tends to be, the example of that principle tends to be a tax that is levied on where profits are created as opposed to where turnover is generated. And the second principle is that these matters do need to become more understandable and more transparent to citizens and to taxpayers across the world. And this is why many of the changes that have been made by President Trump and the changes in the American tax code are ones that we welcome. From our point of view as an open trading economy, to make changes in the American tax code in particular that encourages the repatriation of earnings back to America is something that is a welcome development. And the reason why I say that is the vast amounts of earnings that up to this point have been available within the global tax landscape but did not appear to have been taxed. That was beginning to pose very, very, very serious questions for international tax cooperation and for global economic policy. And so as a small open economy that believes in international tax cooperation, dealing with that issue is something that I welcome. The venue through which we believe many of these issues can be tackled is through the OECD, and I don't believe either Ireland or the OECD has got the credit that is deserved for the progress that both have made in the last number of years in dealing with the kind of issues that you're raising.
Thank you. Shifting to Brexit, which is obviously a crucial economic, political, if not indeed sort of societal development for Ireland and the EU, in fact. I guess one of the things that to me at least, is often underappreciated is how Brexit may change the dynamics among the EU members, the sort of constant shifting alliances on different subject matters, etc. And one of the manifestations of this is, of course, the group, the relatively newly formed group of smaller EU members, which some international newspapers have labeled the Hanseatic League, of which Ireland is a member. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could address how, from your point of view, particularly in the ongoing negotiations about, for instance, deepening of economic monetary union, the digital tax, and other issues that you mentioned. How these new alliances for a post-Brexit EU actually work out, and how you seek to exploit opportunities, so to speak.
Well, the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union is and will have a very significant effect on the political and policy equilibrium within the European Union on a number of different areas. And the way that it had developed up to this point is that those countries who had strong views in relation to trade and openness, many of them could always rely on the United Kingdom to be making the case for these values in different policy debates that are underway right across the European Union. So, for example, in relation to policy choices in financial services, in aviation, the United Kingdom will always have been at the forefront of raising issues in relation to the consumer, in relation to competition, in relation to proportionate regulation. And with the planned departure of the UK from the EU, that does have the potential to shift that kind of focus and centre of opinion. And what has now happened is you have seen a growing number of countries that have now recognised that, and by recognising this have looked to come up with new ways in which we can coordinate our contribution and learn more from each other. So within the Eurogroup and ECOFIN group, which is the process whereby European finance ministers meet every month, my own country, Holland, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia now meet every month for either dinner or for breakfast. And as a group of finance ministers, we have an opportunity to exchange views with each other, find areas of common interest, and amplify our voices on policy issues. So over the last year, we have published a number of different policy papers. We published one on the future of capital markets within the European Union, and we have published one on the future of monetary union and banking union within Europe. And we have also done work in relation to what our principles are on trade and engagement inside the European Union. We have been termed the Hanseatic League. I should make the point that this is not a name that we gave ourselves. An enterprising journalist, and I think I know who it is, coined that name for us. And really what it has provided is a very useful group within which we can find new ways of working together. And you're seeing that happen now across a variety of different policy areas within the European Union.
Very good. Time for questions. We have a standing mic. There is a roaming mic here. If you want to ask a question, please identify yourself and go ahead. The lady there.
Hello. Do I need to turn this on? No, it's on. First, thank you, Minister Donohoe. As an Irish person in DC, I'm immensely proud of your vision, and that was so evident in your talk today. My name is Sophie Smith. I worked for a long time with the World Bank and now work with the World Bank and other clients on a number of issues connected with the financial sector. I'm particularly interested, while having heard very clearly that the UK's departure from the EU is a big loss in every way, I am interested in your views on the extent to which it does, in fact, offer an opportunity to the financial sector in Ireland to expand, and an opportunity for Dublin to become a hub of finance. I'd like your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Sophie, thank you for your question. And what you have done in your question is probably pinpoint the main area of potential benefit for Ireland in a post-Brexit European Union. Though as I addressed your question, I should make clear 2 points. The first one is we wish this wasn't a benefit that we were going to pursue. Our strong view and our strong national view would be we wish the United Kingdom were staying in the European Union. And even though this is a benefit, it is still a benefit, and on the other side of the balance sheet are a whole lot of new challenges and difficulties we are now grappling with. The reason why an opportunity is there is because we will now be one of the remaining launch pads for companies who want to prosper in financial services in the European Union. And because we already have so many of these companies located in Ireland, as they look to ensure how they can maintain access to the single market, we are one of the few obvious locations within which that can be done. What is now happening is we have seen, for many, in particular American banks, we have seen them expand their presence in Ireland. So we have seen companies like, for example, JP Morgan, Bank of America, make decisions regarding changing their status in Ireland and then increasing their investment and products in Ireland to ensure they will have continued access to the European single market. And that is now something that a whole variety of international banks and financial service providers are doing in Ireland. What's encouraging for us, Sophie, though, is even though a lot of this is happening within Dublin, we are now seeing many financial service companies and many international companies grow their employment outside of Dublin. Because we have an airport network that ensures that we can have access transatlantically and into Europe. And of course, with the sophistication now of digital communication, distance and geography is becoming less and less important. So it is an opportunity, it's one we're pursuing, but it's in the midst of something that we wish wasn't happening.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Bunn, Director of Global Projects at the Tax Foundation. Thank you so much for being here today. I have a question related to your comments about digital taxation and the process at the OECD. You mentioned a shared perspective with the US about the importance of the OECD process. Would you also characterize your views of the US's approach or the US Treasury's approach on bringing marketing intangibles to this sort of potential solution, or if there's a different sort of result that you would like to see out of the OECD process?
Sure. Okay, thank you, Daniel. As you were approaching the mic there, it felt a little bit like one of the town hall meetings that we see many of your American politicians participating in regularly when the House or Senate is not sitting, because they all appear to have a microphone in the middle of the room like this one. But thank you for your question, Daniel. Firstly, in relation to two different points there regarding the role of the OECD and then regarding the role then of intangible assets and how they're taxed. Firstly, in relation to the role of the OECD, my experience on dealing with corporate tax reform is that the American government and American policymakers do appreciate the opportunity and the value that the OECD has to offer. From a small open economy point of view, the reason why the OECD is so important for us is it offers the potential to make progress on tax cooperation without creating trading risk. And one of the reasons why I had such concern and have such concern in relation to the work that was developing in relation to a digital tax for Europe is because of the potential for trading risks developing from a unilateral tax decision. So I know that the taxation of the digital sector is going to change. I know that we are moving into another wave of change in relation to international taxation. But in order to manage that safely, it's my very strong view that that has to be done globally, where the United States, Japan, China and the EU at least have the opportunity to move in the same direction together. And that's why we think the OECD is so important. In relation to further work that might take place in relation to the taxation of intangible assets, this is one of the things that we want to engage further with the US Treasury on, because this is something that many economies are reflecting on at the moment. It's a really important area in taxation overall, particularly within democracies. A number of years ago, if you were looking at how we taxed capital, you'd point to a factory, you'd point to a machine, you'd point to something you could touch. The fact now that the assets that have such value are intangible by nature poses really big questions, not just in the world of tax policy, but it poses really big questions for democracies and about how we can demonstrate to our citizens that these assets are being taxed effectively. But what is now clear to me is that this is now something that's fully understood by American policymakers. It's always been clear to me indeed. But the prominence that IP played in the new agreement that the American political system reached on corporate tax reform is a sign that this is really going to be a growing area of engagement in the years to come. And as an open economy that has a big intangible hinterland to it, this is an area that we think will require careful decision making, and the best place within which that can be done is inside the OECD.
Well, if there are no further questions from the audience at the moment, I have another one for you, which basically relates to the fact that 2019 is going to be a year of transition across every major European institution. And that, of course, means that there is a process of selecting new presidents for different institutions, new members of executive boards, and the like. And one of the interesting things that I read, which actually greatly surprised me, I didn't realize it, was that Ireland is the only founding member of the European, the common currency, that has never had a member of the ECB executive board. Now, there is a number of those slots rotating open in the coming 12 to 18 months. So my question is, are you planning to rectify that?
Well, the only thing I can say with certainty is amidst all the change of leadership roles in the European institution, I can say with some certainty that I won't be putting my name forward for any of them anyway. So that's the one thing that's clear to me at the moment. In relation to your direct question on the European Central Bank and the Executive Board of the ECB, as you may know there, last year we put forward the name of Philip Lane for a vacancy on the ECB. We were also very pleased to support the candidacy of Sharon Donohoe for Chief Executive of the Single Supervisory Mechanism. Ultimately, I decided to withdraw Philip's name, and Sharon, while she did really, really well and made the final shortlist of 2, didn't get the role in the end. So coming out of all of that, yes, we are ambitious to try to secure a future role. But am I going to go any further than that for now? No. And the reason for that is there's lots of really good people doing those jobs at the moment. And before I decide if we're going to be putting forward any candidates for those jobs, I think I owe it to the people doing that work at the moment to make a decision about their own futures first. And when that happens, I can assure you that we'll think carefully about what opportunities exist for Ireland in that space, because we have racked up a huge amount of experience now in the banking world and the regulation of banking, mostly because of the great difficulty we went through and the lessons we have learned from it. And we believe we have experience in the area of budgetary policy inside the Eurozone, what we have done well, and also what we have learned from mistakes that we have made. And we would like the opportunity to contribute that experience through European institutions across 2019.
Thank you. I have many questions, so I can easily fill out our available time if nobody from the audience has any burning desire to speak up. Well, in that case, let me return to the sort of very nitty-gritty right now situation of Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we discovered yesterday, in fact, was that the European Court of Justice ruled that it was in fact a unilateral decision of the UK to potentially withdraw their Article 50 basically withdraw Article 50, even into the part where if an Article 50 extension was granted.
Mm-hmm.
Now that obviously means that you could have, or it's easier to imagine a scenario in which Brexit was altogether reversed. But my question then is, given the time that we are in, that in order for instance, another referendum to take place, you would have to have an extension of Article 50. Mm-hmm. What is the view of the Irish government, and you think the other 26 on that? There is, of course, the European elections coming up, so this might be a time-limited one, but how do you think that will be viewed?
So look, you're posing that question at what is a very sensitive point now in this political process. And I guess that's the reason you're putting the question to me.
This is the Peterson Institute. This
yes,
is what we
absolutely.
do.
So there is a very, very historic and serious debate underway in the British political system regarding the future relationship that they want with the European Union. And Prime Minister May has now indicated that she wants to have further engagement with the European institutions and a number of European leaders in advance of the Article 50 discussion that will be happening at the end of this week. And from my point of view, I will leave to the British government the space they need to allow them to work through the coming weeks. And our only focus at the moment is in working to provide clarification, if it can be provided, to allow an agreement to be reached within the UK and the European Union regarding how Brexit will occur. But the point that I made in my speech a few moments ago, I do want to reiterate, which is that we have a withdrawal agreement that has been reached with the United Kingdom. This has been reached not between Ireland and the UK, it has been reached between the EU and the UK. And the text of that agreement is now complete. And you have heard many European leaders now make very clear that they will not be and they cannot renegotiate the text of that agreement. And that isn't just the view of Ireland at the moment, that is the view of the European Union in relation to that agreement. We have made compromises in order to create a political framework within which the good relations between the UK and the European Union can continue in a post-Brexit European Union. But compromises have had to be made by the European Union to get to this point. And the European view, which Ireland is fully part of, is now that the withdrawal text that has been agreed cannot now be renegotiated. And while I know that there is great appetite for trying to engage with the British government at this point, it is based off the strong view of the European Union that the best possible agreement in a difficult situation has now been offered to the British Parliament. And we have worked very hard to get to that point.
Well, thank you very much. We have reached our witching hour, and on behalf of the Peterson Institute, I would like to thank you Minister Donohoe, for your candor and the scope of your remarks today. And we wish you best of luck here in Washington. Foreign leaders these days tend to need a bit of luck when they come here.
Well, could I just thank everybody for attending and just to acknowledge the work of you and the Peterson Institute in many of the debates that are underway now in international economics and policy. One of the reasons why I'm such a regular visitor to the United States and to Washington is Ireland very much believes that in the kind of debate that is now underway here in America and in other democracies in relation to how economies should be organised and in relation to how countries should relate with each other, that countries like our own need to make the case strongly for the benefits of international cooperation and for organisations like the European Union. We see through Europe the sharing of sovereignty as being a process that has made our countries stronger. And we see a transatlantic relationship that has been based on cooperation and the kind of trade rules that your institute thinks very carefully about as being a big part of what a good future can look like. And politicians like myself, I think we need to re-engage in that debate through you and through engagement with other governments to make that point. And that's why it's great to be here with you all today and have the opportunity to make these points to you all. And I wish you and the Institute every success now in 2019.
Well, thank you very much. And on that high note, meeting adjourned.